As Europe braces for the upcoming European elections, the political landscape is fraught with tension and uncertainty. While much attention has been focused on the rise of far-right parties, there's a deeper story waiting to be uncovered. These parties have tapped into legitimate concerns and grievances among voters, and it's yet to be seen how much power they'll hold after the elections. Sky News Digital Originals presents Europe Decides. The primary concerns facing the upcoming European elections are multifaceted. Economic stability, the refugee crisis, and the surge of nationalist sentiments rank among key issues. These resonate deeply with voters and significantly influence their decisions at the ballot box.
In the last 2 years, since the war in Ukraine, energy bills have rocketed. A lot of basic food prices have gone up too. And so for the more disadvantaged members of society, life's become harder. They've seen their wages stagnate. So quite a good statistic, for example, is that in 2008, the Eurozone and the US had comparable GDPs of around about $14 trillion. Now, the EU's GDP is edged up to 15 trillion, whereas the USA, it's 26.9 trillion. So theirs has continued to rise. Well, the EU's has really stagnated. And people feel this, particularly, as I said, since the war in Ukraine. Now, immigration and insecurity are, whatever the left may say, they are tied together. Immigration last year rose by 17% in the EU bloc, mainly from Central and Northern Africa, and also Syrians and Afghans. This has been the case for 10 years since Merkel's decision in August 2015 to throw open the EU's borders. And since then, the EU have systematically failed to control their borders. And there's no sign, really. There was a new migrant pact agreed at the end of last year, but that's managing the situation. It's not stopping the migrants. There's no pushback policy like Australia introduced with such success 10 years ago, which people like Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders and Giorgia Meloni want. And it's at the moment, the opinion polls show that the national conservative parties, the right-wing parties, are on course to get the most seats. But as long as they remain divided and don't form alliances, it won't be able to influence the direction of the EU.
The significance of the European elections in shaping the EU's political landscape cannot be overstated. They serve as a cornerstone in defining the composition of the European Parliament, determining policies and ultimately shaping the trajectory of the European Union itself.
Well, these are very important elections, the most important in the history of the European Parliament, because it's really a fight to gain control of the direction in which the EU is going. And I think 21 of the 27 member states have governments that lean to the right in some degree. And yet, despite this, the EU still is very much of this sort of centre-left progressive dogma. And that's because of Ursula von der Leyen, who was the German defense minister, was not a successful German defense minister. And she was really picked by Emmanuel Macron. And under her, immigration has been out of control. There's been this chasing of a net zero policy. The economy's faltered. And so since he was elected in the last elections in 2019, you've had come to power in Italy, for example, Giorgia Meloni. Marine Le Pen has made the breakthrough in France in having 88 MPs elected. You've got Viktor Orban, who remains as influential as ever, and in Greece and Finland and Sweden, other right-wing parties, and of course Geert Wilders in Holland. So they want to get rid of Ursula von der Leyen and fundamentally change the direction of the EU and make it more, I wouldn't say right-wing. Viktor Orban says national conservatism, and I think that's quite a good description. So it's really going to be what really is a hindrance to these national conservatives is the fact that they're divided.
It's the battle line of the last half century, these liberal democracies, or Western democracies, I should say. You've got sort of the right, center-right party has taken, or the coalition has come into power after a long time, but ascendant in that is this populist group that has gained seats substantially. You see the same trend in Sweden and Finland and the Netherlands, even in Germany and France with Marine Le Pen and all of that. They're ascendant, either winning outright or gaining a big share. And that is because of all the reasons we know. I think the immigration is the biggest fault line over here, changing the demographics of these countries. The rural part of the electorate is feeling disenfranchised. And as you see that momentum, it's sort of a counterweight to the leftward drift of these countries. They're gaining a bigger share of the EU as well, and they're going to have more influence on policy that comes out of that. And I think you're just going to see more of that shift and that battle line.
Marine Le Pen, leader of France's far-right National Rally Party, has announced her intention to sever ties with the Alternative for Germany party, known as the AfD. The decision to distance herself from the AfD has sent shockwaves through the European political landscape. Le Pen has traditionally found common ground with the AfD on key issues. However, recent developments have prompted her to reassess this alliance.
I would say this is the one really genuinely right-wing party in Europe. And because it's German, obviously it sends a shudder through Europe for historical reasons. And the AfD, they've become, what led to this, the final rupture last week, was when their candidate for the European elections said that the SS weren't all bad. So the SS, the paramilitary wing of a Nazi party, who committed untold war crimes, not just against the 6 million Jews, but for example, not too far from where I live, Oradus-Glan, an SS division wiped out the village, killing 643 men, women and children. They executed numerous captured Allied POWs, and just don't mention the SS in any positive way, because there's nothing positive about them. And yet this, the AfD did try to, it was revisionism of the worst kind. And I think for Marine Le Pen, actually, it was the moment that she'd been waiting for to sever ties with the AfD, because they do have such a bad reputation. And, you know, they've said favourable things about Putin in the past, and they also earlier this year came up with an idea of forced remigration for any German citizen of an immigrant background, whether they were here legally or not. And Marine Le Pen at the time said that this is appalling, we disassociate ourselves from this. So I think that she was worried of being tarnished with the same brush as the AfD. So in severing contact, she's got rid of a troublesome ally, and also she's done her image. She said to voters, "Hey, we're a respectable party now. I don't want anything to do with because the Second World War obviously is a sensitive subject for Marine Le Pen, because when her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, founded the party, which was initially the National Front in 1972, it was with a Frenchman who'd fought in the French division of the SS. And while Jean-Marie Le Pen was too young to have been involved in the Second World War, he was described infamously, the gas chambers, as a detail of history. And so it remains a sensitive subject for Marine Le Pen. So having got rid of the AfD, who were in her European group, I think that also increases the chances of her forming some sort of alliance with Giorgia Meloni, who never had anything to do with the AfD. But again, it just shows you in a way, it shows how the Second World War continues to loom over Europe.
Recent political changes have set the stage for a potential reshuffling of power dynamics within the European Parliament. With traditional mainstream parties facing challenges from both the far right and the far left, we could see a more fragmented parliamentary landscape, and this could complicate decision-making processes and necessitate greater cooperation among various political factions.
The biggest party is the European People's Party, so this centre-right stroke centrist party. They have about 177 seats. Next, you've got the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, which does what it says on the tin. It's left-wing, it's progressive. They have about 120 seats. And then the two, Marine Le Pen and Maloney's party, Identity and Democracy, European Conservative Reformists, they both have about 65 seats each. So at the moment, the centre control. The two biggest parties are centrists and centre-left parties. If the Marine Le Pen and Giorgia Meloni's parties were to get enough seats to be able to influence votes and veto policies, then I think we would see a shift in, for example, particularly with net zero, which is unpopular among the electorate, and in so many Western countries, it's driven by this small, progressive political class. Same with immigration. The number one of the big recruits to Marine Le Pen's party was Fabrice Lagerie, who was for 7 years, from 2015 to 2022, the head of Frontex, the European Border Control Agency. Now, he was forced out eventually 2 years ago because he was operating, allegedly, a pushback policy in collaboration with the Greek government, pushing back boats, based very much. He talks warmly of Australia's policy, and says that this is the only way to stop the migrant crisis, because this isn't going to go away, this crisis.
Immigration has emerged as a central theme in political discourse, with many voters expressing concerns about cultural identity and social cohesion. Nationalist sentiments often resonate with these anxieties, shaping electoral outcomes across the continent.
I think the people have lost faith in the political leaders throughout Europe, that they're tired of their empty rhetoric, and they want politicians who are going to act firmly. Now, one criticism of Giorgia Meloni is that when she was elected in September 2022, it was with a promise to really stop illegal immigration, Italy bearing the brunt of it as they crossed the Mediterranean. She hasn't really been able to do that. She's doing her best. And part of the problem is the EU has great leverage over countries because of it controls the purse strings. And it's promised to give about 191 million euros to Italy in funding. Italy's economy has been struggling for many years. And of course, Maloney needs this money. And so she's got to walk a tightrope between living up to the promises of her election campaign, but getting the funding from the EU. And so this is another reason why these elections are so important, because if the right wing of the National Conservatives take control of the EU, there's about 750 seats, then they can not only implement much tougher immigration policies, but they get control of the purse strings.
Emerging voter behaviour trends underscore a growing polarisation within European societies. There's a noticeable shift towards extremes on the political spectrum, with voters increasingly gravitating towards anti-establishment movements. This trend reflects a broader disillusionment with traditional parties and a desire for change.
I mean, it's hard to convey just how angry and demoralised many Europeans are with the way that they feel their governments and the EU generally have been the direction in which they have headed in this century, really. And no one feels, apart from a minority of Europeans, where life has improved materially. For the vast majority, they just feel that things have got worse this century compared to their parents. And it's very interesting to see that this is particularly acute among young people, that it's the older voters, so the baby boom generation, who tend to vote for the status quo, to vote for the centrists. And it's the young people who will vote much more for the sort of parties described as far left, or particularly far right, because they look at their parents and their grandparents and they say to themselves, they had a better quality of life than me, and that can't be right.
As the election draws near, political leaders are continuing to campaign across the country, hoping to secure those final votes.
And it's quite complicated in the EU Parliament how it works. Each national party, for example, Marine Le Pen's National Rally, belongs to a group within the EU Parliament. And there are two groups that are described as right-wing, national conservative. They are Identity and Democracy and the European Conservatives and Reformists. Now, Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, Matteo Salvini of Italy's Lega belong to Identity and Democracy. Giorgia Meloni and Vox in Spain belong to the ECR, the European Conservatives and Reformists. So you've got the bizarre situation where Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, belongs to one European group, and her deputy MP, Matteo Salvini, belongs to another. Okay, so they've both got about 65 members of the European Parliament. But the biggest group of the centre, that describes itself as a centre-right, is the European People's Party, and that is von der Leyen's party. Now, they describe themselves as centre-right, but a bit like the Conservative Party in Britain, they're really sort of social democrats with a strong progressive bent, or quite welcoming for the trans ideology, for example, and quite relaxed about mass uncontrolled immigration. So the two right-wing parties, Identity and Democracy in the ECR, unless they form an alliance, they're going to remain on the fringes, small parties, unable to influence the direction of the EU. So there has been, in the last couple of weeks, signs that they may be forming some sort of alliance. Maloney and Marine Le Pen, for example, don't really have a warm relationship. This is because Le Pen is much more of a protectionist economically. I mean, economically, Marine Le Pen is left-wing. And they also disagree about the war in Ukraine. Identity and Democracy, so Marine Le Pen, Salvini, they really for a peace settlement, whereas Giorgia Meloni has a more Atlantist approach and really wants to take it to the end with a victory for Ukraine. So they are very important elections,